everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Deprogram. As the winter is rearing its beautiful head, we thought we might as well bring you a representative of the one city that looks arguably the best in wintertime. I'm walking over here, New York. We are privileged to have with us lawyer, comrade, owner of the arguably best-looking ginger mustache on the American East Coast, TikTok superstar, and now hopefully dear friend of the show. What's up, man? Welcome to the show. Please take a minute to introduce yourself and plug anything you want to the people who possibly somehow might not have engaged with your work before. And before you start, you're not billing us for this podcast by the hour, right?
No, yeah. Please. I wish. Hi. Thank you for those kind words. I do my best with my mustache routine to keep it in shape and everything like that. I'm Alex. I'm a public defender. Some people may know me, and unfortunately, I am a lawyer who is on the internet, which are some of the worst posters that exist, and I'm not above that. I just want everyone to know, but I'm out here. I'm trying.
You're doing great work. We appreciate it. You're on the front lines posting through it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm definitely constantly posting through it, much to the dismay of my friends and loved ones.
There's very often an interlude of your partner, or I don't know who it is, of like, are you recording? What the fuck are you doing? Is it a TikTok again? It's very funny. It's peak content, but it's also extremely useful. So the dear listeners, don't listen to his radical modesty, and obviously everything, all of his social media and everywhere where you will be able to interact with his work, out of which you can actually learn quite a lot, you will be able to find in the description of the episode. Would you like to add anything else, my friend, or we can move towards the first question, which kind of goes into deep Deprogram lore about our dear comrade JT being visited by scary men in black suits?
I mean, I want to hear about the black suits, to be honest. I don't know.
All right, let's jump in then. So, I went and dug up the actual papers I got from my FOIA request. So I've got the details here. What was the date? It was in September of 2020. I was at home and I got a knock on the door, and this was after I had put out a video shortly before that about the CIA and the coups they've done and all the destabilizing activity they do, and I called it the CIA is a terrorist organization.
Ouch.
That seems fine.
Yeah, normal stuff. And none of this was classified information or something. This was all stuff you can find online or in books, or that heads of the CIA have said on like Fox News and stuff. So it's all out there for people to consume in one form or another. I just put it together, and that got age restricted, which I was used to. It's happened before with some of my videos. Got demonetized. But what I hadn't had happen before was it was completely hidden from search results for the first little bit, because I got reports of people saying even if you search it by its exact title, which should always come up if you do that, regardless of how small the channel is or how few views the video has, if you searched it by its exact title, it still wouldn't come up in search results. People had to go to my channel, go to the videos page specifically before they could see it. And then they had to click through like 3, are you sure you want to watch this, warnings on that video. So that was kind of sus. And I went to Twitter and tweeted at YouTube and said, hey, this is not supposed to happen. And they gave me the bullshit response of like, oh, yeah, that seems to be a glitch. We'll look into it, stuff like that. But of course, it was quietly reinstated a couple days later after some back and forth on Twitter, and that got a lot of attention, that thread. But anyway, I figured that was the end of that. But a few days later, I got a knock on the door. And I was like, all right, I'll just, go answer the door. I don't have a peephole. I didn't have a Ring camera or anything. So I opened the door, and there are two dudes dressed, in their like business casual with a, what do you call it? Like a windbreaker on, heads shaped roughly like thumbs. And I
Hell
was like,
yeah.
yeah, it's exactly what you'd expect. And I was like, hi, can I help you guys? And they're like, well, we're with the Department of Homeland Security. We have a couple of questions for you. Do you have a second? I'm like, I don't think I need to talk to these people, but I'm not sure. Yeah. So I was like, okay, let me just go grab a mask real quick because peak COVID and all that. So I went in, grabbed a mask, and I was kind of like composing myself. It's like, all right, do I try to look it up real quick because I'm fairly certain I don't need to answer any questions, or what do I do? I don't want them to like barge in here and shoot me if I take too long. So I grabbed a mask, went back out, and I figured I'd play dumb. So I went out there, and I'm sure you can tell me how all of this was the wrong decision. But I go out there, and they're like, you're JT Chapman? I was like, yes. This is where you live? Yes. How long have you lived here? Give them that. Anyone else live here? Give them that. Are you a member of any extremist groups, any political or religious? I'm like, no. What do you have any weapons? Like, no, Jesus. And finally, I was like, they had all this stuff written down already on their clipboard. They know these answers. And I finally said, well, guys, what exactly is going on here? Have I done something illegal? And they're like, well, we got some reports recently from your YouTube channel. People are saying there's some anti-American sentiment. I was like, oh. We're still doing McCarthyism. That's still a thing, and that was the term they used, anti-American sentiment. And
Are you serious?
Yeah, which I'd heard of stuff.
Did they show you like identification?
Yeah, they had their cards, and then they gave me their phone number, which I still have in a drawer somewhere. But I spoke to, you might know Legal Eagle, another YouTube channel.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was at a YouTube event, and he had asked me about it because he saw the Twitter thread, and so we talked about it a little bit. He's like, they sound like cowboys to me. They sound like they were kind of just doing their own thing out of the Fort Worth office. And I thought, yeah, maybe that's the case. But anyway, I submitted a FOIA request. Many months later, I got some redacted pages, and it indeed did have a transcript of them coming to visit, and they I had requested the small track FOIA request because you can request like 50 pages is the small one, and then up to, I don't know, a couple hundred pages is the large one, and it just takes longer depending on how many pages you request. And I requested everything because they said they have about 760 pages on me, which I was very surprised at. And they said that would take about 60 months. I was like, man, that's 5 years. So they said, well, you can.
Fuck?
Yeah. So I was like, there's no way like Ken Klippenstein is waiting 5 years for things like the stuff he goes and FOIA requests. But I was like, fine, just give me the small track, the 50 pages, whatever. And waited 4 months. And I have in my hands now like 6 pages. And most of it is explanations of why they redacted stuff. They're citing legal codes like Section 552, 552A, all that garbage. Anyway, that was my experience. So my question is, how badly did I play that? Like, what is the proper response when someone shows up on your doorstep and demands to ask questions of you?
Don't open the door, say, where's your warrant, tell them to fuck off.
Yeah.
No. I mean, the truth is that, like, it doesn't matter who you are unless you're a complete fucking bozo. And I'm not saying I'm not calling you a bozo. I just want to be clear. You are a bozo. Interacting with law enforcement is a kind of stressful experience. And I think actually what happens a lot of the time is that people, they are stressed out by it, and they also default to this thing that's deeply like enmeshed like in our brains of like, I didn't do anything wrong, like I can talk to these guys, you know what I mean? And the truth is, like, you should never fucking talk to the cops, like, under any circumstances, because they just need anything can be used against you. That means, a statement out of context can be used against you. But, they can come up to your house if they want to and knock on the door and say, hey, you want to come outside and, answer a few questions? And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, would be like, yeah, what the fuck do these guys want?
Yeah.
So it is hard, but like when the trainers for like the Know Your Rights training, do stuff for undocumented people, one of the things they say is like, you keep your door closed, you don't let them in the house, you ask them to show you a warrant, blah, blah, blah. And that's really should be, in that kind of situation, should be your default. It's like, you don't want to interact with these guys. You don't know why they're there. Obviously, they were there in bad faith. I mean, it's crazy, right? And the fact that he or whoever said it to you, I mean, that's That's like ridiculous. They
Yeah.
he was they were investigating. What they say? Did they literally say un-American,
They said
anti-American?
anti-American sentiment. Yeah.
Yeah, what
And
the fuck is that about? I can do whatever the fuck I want. I could have my nuts out respectfully and hate America all I want. That's not any of their fucking business, buddy.
Yeah.
You know? Jesus
and
Christ.
at the end, well, I'd said like, okay, is there something like what is it that you're investigating here? And they said, well, we're part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and so what we do is we need to let you know that if anyone were to watch your YouTube videos and commit an act of terrorism and cite your videos, we could have you charged with a crime. And I'm like,
Yeah, seriously?
yeah. Yeah, that was my thinking, because like Ben Shapiro's still doing his thing out there, and you know, plenty of shooters have cited his stuff. So, but I was like, yes, sir, thank you, sir, have a great day, and that was that.
Yeah, so they're just kind of intimidating you. Classic. They love that shit, man.
It was one of those things where it's like, you know, I know this stuff happens, and like people go to protest, and then the cops show up at their doors later or stuff like that. But like I make YouTube videos in my pajamas. I barely ever leave the house, and these guys like show up on my doorstep and try to strong arm me and stuff like that. It's weird. It's not something you ever expect will happen to you, and I guess that's a bad perspective to have, because you need to be prepared if it does happen to you. So good to know you don't have to talk to these people. So should you just, your default is, can I see a warrant?
I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, I would never open the door for people, telling me that they're the cops without, seeing some kind of identification first, and then being like, what do you want? Why are you here? Talk them to the door. I don't really care that it irritates them, because the fact, now here, truthfully, and I should say, add one additional context to this, is that, I'm a white dude. So and I'm also a fucking attorney, so I feel a little bit more comfortable telling cops to go fuck themselves. So that's definitely part of the context here. I understand that, for some people, their interactions with the police are way more stressful than my interactions with the police. So people, but oftentimes people kind of know that context, because sometimes they have more exposure to the police. They live in places that are more heavily policed, XYZ. So it's like, but I'm just saying, generally, you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're talking with them. You know what I mean? It's like, you could talk to my lawyer. Oh, I'd like to have my lawyer present. I want to talk to you with my lawyer present. What the hell? No, thanks, man. And then they're saying all this shit and trying to get in your head and whatever. Fuck them. Bozo Patrol.
No kidding. But so then they'll fuck off after that point if you say you're not going to answer questions without a lawyer. That's generally your experience, is they'll just kind of leave, or
I think
give you a vague
kind
threat.
Of thing, yeah, vague threat for sure. The only thing you got to be worried about is, right, like, you also have to know your situation, where it's like,
sure,
oh, are these guys going to say that they heard somebody yelling inside my house and they break the door? Because they're shady. There's just the fact that they're there, it's already shady, right? So it's just like, you don't know what they're going to do. Like, you have to be careful. You have to protect yourself too. But it could have been way worse, and it's not like you said, oh man, yeah, like, this is so crazy, I was just doing a line of drugs,
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. You'd be surprised. I mean, look, you'd be surprised what people say to cops.
I can believe it. Well, there you go. You heard it here first. Don't talk to cops, and they are sneaky, and they'll try to incriminate you.
Please do not talk to them. Where's my lawyer?
If it looks like a thumb, talks like a thumb, don't talk to the thumb.
It's a thumb.
It's a fucking thumb. Okay, the phenomenal discussion through which we are starting off this episode, and I'm going to switch it over to a more general topic, a very heavy topic, and I believe we have just the right person here to talk about it. Prisons. I mean, nobody wants to be in one, but knows a guy or two they would love to lock up. The discussion on the ethics of incarceration is as old as time, from the bad old days of chopping off arms, plucking out eyes, to Scandinavian hotel jails. Punishment versus rehabilitation, and all that philosophy is fine and dandy, and we can talk about that if you wish, but please, as an expert on the matter and someone who's seen countless cases go through your fingers, do you think prisons, for the lack of a better word, even like fucking work?
Yeah, end of episode. No, just kidding. So also, expert, I would put an asterisk next to that. Hopefully today's discussion, what we can do is it'll be like it'll be like prison abolition or abolition for dummies. You know what I mean? It'll be like the dumbest guy, the bottom guy from the law school explains to you what's happening.
Again with the fucking modesty. We do not accept modesty in this podcast. Shut the...
Okay, so it's not, please. Okay, so the initial thing is with this question is it's kind of like a trick question because the answer to it depends on sort of what you think the purpose of prisons is. I mean, I can tell you that the popular understanding of what a prison is for in the popular imagination is, and this is somebody who has no class analysis and kind of looks at the world like everything exists in a vacuum. And it's basically like, if you did something you're not supposed to do, then you should be punished for that. For those people, the issue is that, well, we don't spend enough. You know what I mean? Like the problem is that we don't have enough prisons or we don't have enough resources going to cops. And that's the reason why crime is bad, which is obviously very, very silly because it's an extremely, extremely shallow analysis of everything that's going on. It totally ignores poverty and the impacts of poverty, the impacts of capitalism and hoarding of resources and wealth. But I would say, unfortunately, it's how a lot of people in the United States kind of view it. It's like, well, the problem is that they need to be, tinkered with a little bit. We need better funding. We need better programs or whatever. And so that's kind of the first part of it. And then I think for people with a little bit more of a nuanced analysis, like a liberal, MSNBC person, or some of these people who I'm not going to name, who have recently been on Twitter saying really, really stupid shit, they might recognize that like, oh, prisons are really bad. People are dying. 13 people have died in Rikers just this year. 16 people in Rikers died last year. It's hell on earth. It's horrible. And what's actually really crazy is Rikers is not even one of the worst jails in the United States. There are honestly worse jails in Chicago. And it's also a pretrial detention center, which means that this shouldn't, and I don't think this should matter, but the vast majority of people there, I think 84% of the people there are being held pre-trial. Yeah. Right? So they're not even fucking convicted of a crime. So a person has been dying every month at Rikers and they're not even convicted of a crime. Like it's a fucking nightmare. But basically that framework says, oh, we need to like make prisons more humane, even though there's really, that isn't really a thing that exists. And, we need to give people more programming, reentry options, drug treatment, blah, blah, blah. Even though the truth of those systems is they have all these strings attached that make them kind of impossible for people to have success. And then finally, there's the reality pilled based and class analysis pilled people who know that prisons are doing exactly what they're meant to do, which is to criminalize populations entirely along lines of race and class and feed a prison industrial complex that also serves to gobble up all of the detritus. And by that, I mean, unfortunately, human beings who are viewed as societal detritus, whose existence in their state of destitution is a direct result of capitalism. So to answer your question, sorry for ranting, prisons are doing what they're meant to do, but they're not making any of us safer or society better, and they're making everything worse.
I'm speechless. Could not agree more. Personally, which kind of leads us in the direction of expanding on your answer, which is like, why does it happen to be the case that the working class and people of color, especially when it comes to the U.S., get punished with severity so insanely disproportionate to that of for example, the super wealthy? And as cliche as it is, but steal $1,000 and you're a criminal, steal $1 billion and you're an entrepreneur.
It's complicated, right? Like, I mean, I think the boiled down answer is that the system is steeped in white supremacy and is inherently racist, but also that it's directly tied to the interest of sort of the powerful and the rich, or whatever you want to say, global capital, whatever. So there are all these interests in maintaining the system that keeps the working class impoverished and down. And I think that's a really big part of it. But when we talk about, people of color and people from other marginalized communities, they're disproportionately targeted by police. Some of this is because the history of the prison system in the United States is a direct link between the one we have today and the institution of slavery. And the foundation for prisons in the U.S. is slavery. And there's a great book about this called Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis, where she goes into this. It's my favorite book by her. And after the Civil War, when slavery was abolished, in the South especially, but everywhere in the United States, laws were passed to criminalize being black. Like literally they were called black codes. And some of these things were like criminalizing of vagrancy, which could include actions like not going to work or hanging out on a sidewalk. It's called loafing, they would call it. Mm-hmm. And it was
Damn, I'm the biggest criminal then.
Yeah, you're
the biggest criminal.
I know, we're all guilty of it. And so it was really, really easy for recently freed slaves and later on, their children to get sucked into this system that some people, like historians and writers on this, have said it was worse than slavery because prisoners were free labor that wasn't paid for by slave owners, which means we're not saying, obviously slavery was horrific, awful, terrible, but a plantation owner, had an investment in the people that he owned as property. So the system that developed after the end of the Civil War, they didn't care at all what happened to prisoners, the convict leasing system. So it was brutal. Tons of people died, or they lived in conditions that it's hard to even, really imagine. You read about them and what people went through and then things they died over, like chains going against their legs and getting infected and all these disgusting, horrible things. But the system at that point was very racialized. It was in the bones of this system. Like even the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, allowed slavery to continue, which was that, if you're a criminal, you can be a slave. So this linked criminality to color. Frederick Douglass said that there was a tendency to impute crime to color. And that obviously still holds true today, right? It wasn't long ago that in New York City, the city was being sued for stop and frisk policies that impacted hundreds of thousands of black and brown people and led to their harassment, detainment, arrest. And so really long answer to say the system is racist, but okay, we knew that. We have the facts and figures about all this so you can see how it's racist. My whole thing, and I think for a lot of abolitionists, at a certain point, after a certain number of outcomes, the continuing and consistent outcome is obviously the purpose of this system. You can't say, well, we are not sure anymore. We're not sure yet if it's working or not. Like we know that it's not working and we see what the outcomes are, and it's, death and destruction and creating cycles of poverty in sort of the most vulnerable communities in the country.
Now, that's especially true for the United States because we know statistically that 25% of the world's entire prison population is centered in the U.S. And the reason why that the conversation should revolve around the U.S. when we're talking about law in particular is because U.S. is one of the rare states on the global level which openly states about itself as a country that has it figured out, has criminality figured out, has a country where you are actually free to pursue your goals in life, etc., and you are going to be safe from all the criminals and bad guys out there, etc. So the U.S. is supposed to be the pinnacle representation of what, let's call it, capitalist law is supposed to look like. Yet in the state, the wealthiest state on planet Earth, and the state with the largest number of people in prison than anywhere else in proportion, being as inefficient at combating what it praises to be the king at combating at, kind of shows how the entire thing, the entire of the approach doesn't fucking work. Because, people like to point that, oh, look at the Central African Republic, or look at the Central European country, or look at this Central Asian country. Their laws, the legislature there, for example, is extremely corrupt. And that is why, stuff is not getting properly done because, they're not following the law the way, all these white Western civilized states are. But then we look at the U.S., which is, the definition of a Western proud democracy democracy, etc., etc. And there's motherfuckers dying in prison that aren't yet even accused of a crime. It's a country, again, sorry for repeating myself, but has the largest fucking prison population on planet Earth. So the argument that, it's bad implementation and not a systemic issue goes out the fucking window, when it's also not working at the place where, based on all logic, it should be working the best at,
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah, everything that guy said, that's right. But it's also beyond, obviously it's racist, and I don't want to separate these two things out because I think they are integrally related to each other. But it's also useful for the goals of capitalism, in that it can do all of these nice things for rich and powerful people, and the number one of those kind of being is making invisible the problems of capitalism, and it's a sad reality, but a lot of people don't want to see houseless people or people struggling with addiction or mentally ill people. And in fact, this also deeply impacts our politics in the United States. And I think it impacts politics in other places. People go, oh, this is a bad part of town now or whatever. And you see it constantly in sort of popularized propaganda talking about these things, and not actually talking about well, why are these people on the street in the first place? How'd they get here? What's going on? How did we fail them as a society? It's well, I don't want to, there's homeless people, I don't like them, it doesn't have any analysis on that.
It's breaking down the real estate value of the fucking neighborhood.
Yeah, no, really though, truly. And they basically, it's that a lot of people who have influence and power and wealth, and maybe not even necessarily the true capitalists, the people who are really controlling our society, but just very wealthy people, they don't want to see the direct outcome of this system, which doesn't value human beings and will happily slash social welfare spending to give more money to rich people, or invest in war and imperialism and police forces that hold up this whole system. And the system itself has to make these people invisible, because if they aren't made invisible, then people like you or me or your listeners, they might want to change social policies and the dynamics that lead to innumerable people starving, living on the streets, struggling with mental illness, everything like that, because those changes are going to cost rich and powerful people money, and in an ideal world, an end to a system that has given them that power. That's really, they're a bunch of crooks.
It sounds almost simplistic, but okay, if everybody gets to let's imagine, you're doing relatively well, but every fucking day on the street, you see immeasurable fucking poverty, disease, fucked up shit happening, robberies, whatever the fuck you want to call it. After you end up seeing that for quite a while, what does that do to your political beliefs, etc., etc.? Come on, children, it radicalizes you. So if you start getting radicalized, you can go in two directions. Every listener of ours knows this. You can go right or you can go left. You can be a reactionary. You can find actual material grounds, on systemic grounds, which have caused said things. So if we don't want people to get radicalized, especially in this one direction, the other one, we like those guys, but if we don't want them to get radicalized and see how the system is set up, and again, this is where it sounds super simplistic, but apparently it's how it happens. If you don't want them to keep seeing poverty, just pick up all those fucking poor people and put them between four walls.
Yeah,
and
no, that's exactly it. And it's really messed up, but that's exactly what it is. And in some places, they're just it's out of sight, out of mind. In a lot of encampments where people are living and very obviously struggling, the reaction by a lot of city councils has been all right, we got to bulldoze these places. You know what I mean? It's it's not dealing with it at all. It's just all right, let's make these people's lives a little bit more chaotic and miserable. Also, hopefully I hope these people who we now take the only possessions that they own on this planet and the only barely human sense of community they have, let's take that away from them, and then hope that they don't have a shit fit at Rite Aid or whatever. All of these things are connected, right? None of these things happen inside of a vacuum. And the problem is that the way we talk about them, and that's also something that for the people listening, I really want them to think about, is that it's difficult, but these are things that don't exist in a vacuum. And abolition, truly, more than anything else, requires you to be thoughtful about that and not act like a fucking child, like, to be honest, and not just be like, well, there's crime and we need to stop it. It's like, yeah, all right, we know there's crime. We know. We're trying to stop it, you fucking bozo. Like, that's the whole thing, because it turns back on itself. Sometimes you hear so many politicians talk about things like this, like Obama talking about abolish the police, or fucking Biden being like, no, we have to fund the police, even though they get funded over $100 billion a year in the United States. And they saw less than 1% overall reduction in police budgets after the George Floyd protests.
Yeah.
So functionally nothing changed at all in terms of police funding. And these people are acting like they were destroying all of the police departments, taking all their funding away. And again, remember, this is like to take that money and to actually put it into communities, as opposed to like, the guys who come into the community have no connection to it and criminalize it.
I think part of the problem is that we are almost incapable of talking about systemic issues here in the States because everything has become so hyper-individualized. That's the only way we're able to conceptualize stuff is personal responsibility. If someone goes to jail, they made bad decisions. And you know what? Yeah, they do deserve to work for free putting out fires or manufacturing hand sanitizer for the rest of us because they made bad decisions. And that's something we have to come to grips with and really figure out how we can kind of broach that subject and talk about systemic issues without those people just plugging their ears and saying, nope, they made bad decisions, they're bad people.
Yes. And JT, let me follow up on that beautiful point with a nugget of knowledge that just I thought of that's truly beautiful, which is that part of the history of the creation of the modern prison, some of it stems from the change that happened during the French Revolution when we started to focus on the individual rights and the individual as the former, the formal sort of bearer of, rights and liberties, liberté, égalité, fraternité. I don't know. I don't speak French.
I love you, Americans. Yeah. But, you're good.
but that change to the individualism. And then beyond that, kind of like the age of reason when, literally labor became divorced from its output. And then there was that alienation. And I think that what's so interesting to me is, historically that coincided with people being punished by spending time in a prison where there were time calculations done, like labor, which I think is like connected to the labor theory of value. I think those things actually are intricately connected. All these things, they seem disconnected, but they're all so connected to one another. I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass. Whatever. What do you want from me?
No, very good. No, dude, very good points. I don't know what you're expecting of yourself. Like, you make absolutely perfect sense. It's very good. But like that leads us to because you just talked about the French Revolution. You talked about the historic remnants of U.S. slavery. We touched on free labor in prisons in general. But people talk shit and rightfully of how certain states of our quote-unquote ideological current engaged in forced labor, prisons, camps, call it whatever you want. But funny enough, a place like, the Soviet Union had the last gulag closed back in the 60s, and yet the US, again, as we said 7,000 times because it is important, the wealthiest country to have ever existed, has prison slave labor to this point. And you addressed this
extensively?
Extensively, спасибо. Extensively. So are these just the remnants of an old system, all of the systems that you mentioned previously, or is it backed up by an industry of unimaginable size? I mean, I know how freaky I personally found it when I heard that, you psychos have private prisons. But jokes aside, as a professional in the legal field in general, these are a few questions I know, I apologize. What is your take?
Yeah, so it's not remnants. It is the system. Sorry, my dog is barking. The thing about private prisons, which you mentioned, I just like to remind people that actually less than 10% of incarcerated people are in private prisons. So, while the idea of private prisons definitely captures the popular imagination, I just want to reiterate the idea that the problem is prisons, and it's not even the public or private distinction. Although, yeah, it is obviously like the second you hear it, like a private prison, you're like, what the hell is this? There's a profit motive behind this. This is insane. I think that between the two important institutions that we're talking about here are prisons and the police. And like I said, the police get over $100 billion of funding a year. You know, in New York, the NYPD budget is, I don't know exactly what it is. It's definitely clear of $6 billion. It depends how you're counting.
Around 4 to 5 times the amount that my whole country has on a yearly basis.
It's it's a horrifying amount of money that they spend on it. And like I said, you know, big, powerful people like Barack Obama will treat abolitionists and activists, who are on the ground. They're doing work. And I'm not considering myself in this, just so we're clear. Like, I'm a public defender, but I don't mean these people are doing a lot more than me. Like out on the streets, bleeding, working, dying, organizing their communities. But they're getting treated like they're naive when, as we've said, the outcome of the system is the fucking point of it.
Thinking it works is naive, motherfucker. Like,
right, exactly. Yep. Yes, yeah. Totally. And I think, like, California built more prisons in the 80s and 90s than it did in the prior 100 years before that. And you know that was directly tied to Reaganism and the war on drugs. And California, which is, we talk about as a very progressive place and whatever, has some of the largest prisons on earth. And so I think with the development of prisons over the last, 75, 100 years, it's clear that it's just become an issue on steroids, where the history was already there, the foundation, the racist foundation was already there, but now it's fully built out, and this institutional force that just prisons alone, cost over $100 billion a year. I think the average is like 500 million per state that's spent on prisons, but wow. The reality is it's to put one person in prison in New York, it costs like north of $70,000 a year for a single person. So you think about all of that money getting poured into this, and you're like, well, man, wouldn't it be nice to, give that to that community as opposed to whatever the fuck, this thing is? And I think that next to it and sort of handshake is policing in the United States. We need to kind of resist the urge to say, it's time to reform. We really need, better technology. We need XYZ. Because the reality is that, like, as somebody like Foucault will tell you, is that the reform becomes the reification of the system. It becomes a way to keep it in place and not actually change anything. I think he described it as like, it's the program. Like, reform is the program in Discipline and Punish, which is a cute book that he wrote. I think it also just blows my mind, knowing the history of the development of prisons, how much it's built into our lives, certainly in the United States, but I think in a lot of other places too. Famous philosophers like Jeremy Bentham, like literally designed the panopticon, It's a beautiful thing that is now representative of our modern lives, where we're all like surveilling each other constantly. There was actually a prison that was designed after the panopticon in the United States in 1826, something like that, in Pittsburgh. That was the first fully functional panopticon prison in the United States. And it's obviously only gotten worse from that point, where people were kept in total isolation from each other. And I think that's still represented today in supermax prisons, where people spend 23 hours a day inside of a cell the size of, like a parking spot. So I don't think like remnants. I think it's alive. It's here. It's flourishing. And any attempts to push back against this system is met with extreme reaction and anger, because you're seen as a radical if you're trying to push back against it.
Or even worse, naive, as you said. Which
yeah, worse. Is it worse to be naive than a radical? I don't know.
One thing I've heard that is pretty damning of the system, and you can tell me if this is accurate, is that modern day, police squads are more or less descendants of runaway slave patrols. And, if that's the case, then it's a pretty clear through line of white supremacy from very early in this country's history to modern policing and incarceration.
Yes. Yeah, that is true. And that is their history. And what's so messed up about the police aspect in this is that they're also tied to that idea of we can't do reform. This isn't a thing that can be reformed. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And the history of that is super fascinating. Mariam Kaba has this new book she just wrote called No More Police. Great book, highly recommend. And one of the things she outlines is kind of like the history of these reform efforts that go over a century. There is this thing called the Lexow Commission in 1894, where they were talking about police corruption, extortion, harassment, violence, all these things. And they had 700 witnesses, and literally nothing changed at that point. And then a few decades later in New York, the Wickersham Commission, which was about prohibition, it was in 1929. And it was really amazing because they recommended, and this is a quote, better leadership and management, more effective training, better policies and procedures, more oversight, new technology. It sounds like something that's like written about a bad police department from this year. They're just like, okay, we're really thinking about it. We're gonna do a reflection, and we're all gonna take a retreat.
It sounds like a business university student that didn't study for a fucking exam on how to improve the HR department, and they wrote down like 10 buzzwords.
Yeah.
And the fucking police departments are doing the same thing. But as you said, like 50 years later, it's again the same fucking 10 bullet points just being put. We will be better cops. And also uniforms should be cleaner. And maybe we shouldn't arrest the wrong people as much. Fucking, it's again, just, I think this is the main point out of this episode that can be taken is that it's not messed up. It is working how it is supposed to be working. This is it. This is the prison system. This is capitalist criminality, etc., etc. It's as lubed up and as fucking ready to go through every single one of you if you ever oppose it. That using the argument that we get to reform it if we get to reform it a bit, if we get to move some funds around, if we get to paint it in fucking pride colors and shit, if we have more black prison guards and female prison CEOs, we're gonna fix this fucking thing up. It's the whole point is that this is how it's supposed to run. That is where systematic change comes in from the roots upwards. The tree needs to be fucking
watered. Sometimes.
Yeah, massively with police tears. Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that is that a lot of the time reform efforts are kind of like, they're co-opted, as they often are, like in different spaces, but especially with abolition, whether it's like abolish the police, abolish prisons, whatever, the efforts are co-opted to take steam out of the movements and to maintain these systems. So like a really, really good example of that is after Khalif Browder's death, he was incarcerated at Rikers pre-trial for 3 years. He was held in solitary confinement for 18 months, and he basically lost his mind. I mean, he took it. Yeah, he took his own life, unfortunately. Jeez. And after that, they passed a law, and one of the things that law did that the beautiful Goomba Andrew Cuomo signed was it gave $12 million in funding to a child detention center, basically a child jail, named after Harriet Tubman, by the way. Just so you know, yeah, the child jail. It's the Harriet Tubman child jail. So it's a really, really glaring example.
Is there an MLK jail? Is there an MLK jail?
I don't know. There probably is.
Yeah, probably is.
But that's the thing. That's what happens. The efforts are co-opted, or money just ends up getting funded back into these institutions. And I mean, it's what Joe Biden is like doing right now with police funding, right? Where it's like, we're going to pass these laws, and guess what? Guess who's getting money? The fucking police departments that we want to defund. You know, it's like the exact opposite. And that happens constantly. They're like, oh, we need better training, actually, is the problem. It's like, no, the problem is that these institutions are spending billions of dollars that we should be giving to communities who know better about how to use that money and how to keep their communities safe. That's the reality.
And I also heard that, since you mentioned communities, that very often in the U.S. in particular, communities are policed by cops that aren't even from those fucking communities.
Yeah, of course.
Like, to an outsider, that, like, yes, our legal system here is super fucked up as well. Don't get me wrong, but it just sounds fucking batshit, man. Why would you do? Okay, but yes, so it's true, huh? It's true.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, I think a third of the NYPD. I just want to be clear. I think a third of the NYPD lives on Long Island, actually. But I do want to be clear that, like, it didn't really matter where they're from, right? Like, in terms of it's glaring and messed up, but I just want the cops to go away. You know, I don't want to be like, oh, we need more cops from the Bronx to be in the Bronx. No, that's like that community policing bullshit that, like, guess what? People still get arrested. People still get killed. We don't want that shit. We want them out. Give me a community center. Give me after school activities. Give me school lunches. Give things to these communities. Don't fucking criminalize them, which is all it's all that stuff does is criminalize them.
Absolutely. So, Alex, defense attorney or prosecutor?
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, is harder, and why is it being defense attorney?
I mean, the simple, fuck prosecutors. They have the whole apparatus of the state. Like, how could you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't even matter if you're a private bar defense attorney who has maybe like a little bit more funding behind you or has access to more stuff. Like, obviously that's helpful in a case, but they have the entire apparatus of the state behind them. And they also have, the benefit of years and years of popularized propaganda, like Law and Order being maybe the best example, that are just like, really buried in people's minds.
All like law related shows or films, not all of them, but 99% of them that I watched that came out of the West, the defense attorney is always like the bad guy. He really doesn't want this pedophile to go to prison.
The guys on Law and Order, they're like, all right, like, you know what I mean? Like, they're not all like, yeah, sure, there's some guys who are like a little bit sleazy, but like so over the top. And like, I think also my whole thing is people like asking me questions like, well, would you rather have a good prosecutor or like a shittier prosecutor? And it's just kind of like, hey, how much poop do you want to eat? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want a fucking prosecutor. And I think that, in our culture, there's a general positive reception of prosecutors. And even though there's been like some pushback, it's still like very culturally dominant. And just to like demystify for some people, I mean, I don't know what your listeners kind of like think about this type of stuff, but like a guy like
whatever we tell them,
they think, all right, they're going to do what we tell you. All right, you pieces of shit. No. Okay. So it's incredible to me that guys like Preet Bharara, who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, are like seen as kind of heroes in popular culture to a lot of people, right? Because he's like the, excuse me, Mr. Trump, kind of dude. Yeah. And he like will be on MSNBC. But the reality is that like he oversaw some of the largest RICO cases ever in New York, where he was in, they were policing the poorest neighborhoods, putting away teenagers, like 120, they had 120 indictments a couple years ago on one of these. And more than half of them, they just, they're doing RICO charges, which is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act or whatever it's called. I don't know. And it was like they were posting on Facebook, or they were like friends with people who might have been in gangs, and they pursued all these people. I mean, they like fucked up this entire community. And, people are like, we love that guy. He hates President Trump. Like, he's going to stop him.
He said Cheeto Man bad.
Yeah, no, it really is kind of like that. And I think people also underestimate the power of prosecutorial discretion, which is a huge part of the criminal system in the United States, is the fact
is that? For us idiots, what is that?
Yeah. Prosecutorial discretion is basically the ability of prosecutors to determine like what kind of case they're going to bring, what kind of case they're going to pursue, what kind of charges they're going to pursue, the recommendations they're going to make to the judge. It's the power of being a prosecutor. And the reality is that a lot of the decisions made by an office are made higher up the chain, like where a line prosecutor who's just like in a courtroom every day has a little bit less flexibility in some of the choices that they make because they're doing what their supervisor tells them they have to do. But the reality is that like, it's like Nuremberg or something, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, so my, this elderly client who is clearly has like a drug addiction issue and has lived on the street most of their lives needs to go to prison for drug addiction. Like, what the fuck are we talking about? And that's the reality. It's this ability to pick and choose, what crimes are worthy. And getting back to that idea of like, hey, why aren't more CEOs in jail? You know what I mean? It's like, well, they're not in jail because they're the people with power and prosecutors can decide who goes to jail. So that's just how it is.
And even like I watched one of your, I watched every single one of them, but one of your TikToks that now like speaks to me when it comes to exactly what you just said. Let's say, okay, there's a case currently being run against someone and they want to post bail because, they don't want to fucking die in detention, or they want to organize better by being out, etc., etc. When you're setting up such a case, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to get as much information, be it from the community or be it from their own personal history, etc., etc., that is going to show the judge that the flight risk is relatively low for this particular person. So if somebody's, for example, houseless and happens to be living on the street for a while, it's going to be 7,000 times more difficult to bring up a case for bail than a dude who probably had fucking lunch with that same judge like 3 months ago, but just made the Goldman Sachs failing look like a fucking joke. Obviously he's going to get bail even though he has the funds to escape in like 3 seconds to an island and never be seen again. But the poor fucking grandma on the street that happens to have to do stuff to just continue living without blowing her brains out is never going to get said bail. Yeah, so it's tell me if I'm wrong. Like even such a like beginning of a case type of situation as bail is already giving us volumes of information on just how the system is set up against people who live in poverty.
Yeah, bail is set up to keep poor people incarcerated. Bail is created to coerce people into making plea deals that they otherwise might not, and it's kind of insulting that we say when somebody takes a guilty plea to something that they did so, intelligently, knowingly, and voluntarily. How can you say somebody's doing something voluntarily when they're in a place where people are dying every single month and the conditions are like, being in a war zone or something? How can you say that person made a voluntary decision to save their own life and get out of there? And that aspect of coercion is a huge part of bail. Bullying people into taking plea deals. A big part at play in all of this is the propaganda of the media. I mean, I'm thinking of like the New York Post right now, but the media generally does it. The mainstream media does it when they talk about things like bail reform, which is trying to help, keep people out of jail, and has been very successful because a lot of people come to their fucking court dates. But you see a story that's like, man, does whatever bad thing. You also don't see, you see one story, the guy punches the other guy, but he was out on bail, and they have a picture of the guy, and they also have like the name of the judge. This is what the New York Post likes to do. You don't have the 100 stories of man gets out of Rikers, takes his daughter to school, is useful member of his family. You know what I mean? Like, is able to support his children or whatever. You don't get that. You don't see those things because those stories aren't told. They just want to tell stories about what their kind of agenda is, which is let's put more people in. So yeah, it's really fucked up, and it's unbelievable that it's still a thing, and it also shows it really shows the uphill battle that like activists and policy, you know, people interested in these policies have, because the second you get a little win, which is like, we're going to change some of the bail laws, you get this reaction, which is, it's horrible here, you know, it's everything is falling apart, it's on fire, but realistically, crime, you know, hasn't changed that much, blah blah blah.
So when you have to deal with stuff like this on a daily basis, for which I believe I can speak in JT's name and in Hakim's name, we thank you. How tempting is it to just get away from the cases that impact so intensively the lives of, if I can call it, your clients? So how tempting is it to, you know, just go corporate, or is that just a movie thing?
I think it's a temptation at the beginning. I think for people who go to law school, it's a temptation in the beginning to do that because it's very expensive. So it's a natural coercive pathway for people to end up doing kind of corporate work because it pays a lot of money. And, you know, like we've kind of said, we live in a deeply individualistic society, right? Like, I'm very critical of myself, but we generally don't really like to critique people's personal choices, even if sometimes, you know, the domino effect is like helping DuPont to poison a town, or like, you know, less dramatically, like just reinforcing structures of global capital and being a cog in sort of that machinery. So like there's a temptation, I think, but also I would be fucking miserable doing that shit. And I think my friends that do it are also pretty miserable. And I don't think, you know, I don't know, try to be more human, you know, if you can, or it fucking sucks. Like, I don't know, that shit, it seems real soul sucking. The only thing they have is the fact that they make a lot of money. And I don't know that you can derive a lot of pleasure or happiness in your own life by doing that. You know, like I my job is very, very stressful, but I do get a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of like being able to do something meaningful for another human being. You know, like that to me is like almost makes it worth it.
Yeah, but what color is your Bugatti though?
Yeah, no. I was driving a Civic. It's gone now because I'm back in the city. But it's, you know, there's temptation, I think. But also lawyers, like, fuck lawyers, dude. Fuck me. Fuck lawyers. Whatever.
So ideally, would you want lawyers gone in an ideal world?
Yes. Yeah. I think, you know, the Dean Spade, who wrote this little kind of like pamphlet book called Mutual Aid, it's pretty good, wrote this essay about people thinking about going to law school that I think actually I would recommend if people are thinking about that, although please fucking don't go to law school. I think the most important thing though is like deprofessionalizing legal work, like demystifying it, making it more accessible to people and understandable, and like just making people understand that like non-lawyers can do a lot of legal work, you know, like the Know Your Rights training, that's like people, you know, non-lawyers can do that stuff, and it's really helpful to communities. And I mean, like, look, the Supreme Court case that made public defenders, that gave you a constitutionally protected right to counsel, that was from a guy who was incarcerated, you know, who filed all that stuff, you know, Gideon. I mean, like he did it. Like, I don't know. He was just a guy who was real pissed and made some of the most important case law that exists for your constitutional rights in the United States. So I think kind of like deprofessionalizing it is important. And also just understanding that like lawyers are fucking dumb as hell. Like they don't have some kind of fancy knowledge. They're not fucking doctors. They have maybe a specialized dialed in thing that they focus on. And truthfully, they learn the vast majority of like what they do on the job. You know, you don't really learn, you kind of touch upon all these different things in law school. You don't become an expert in any of them, you know? Like I thought I was going to be a securities lawyer, which is so evil. I don't even want to say that. But I, you know, I had my own like kind of bend on it. Like my first summer I worked at the SEC and I was like, I'm going to make rich guys get in trouble. I was like, that'll be good. And then I realized like, oh, wait a second. None of these guys are getting in any trouble. This is so fucked up. Yeah. So whatever, you know, learn by doing. But No,
But yeah,
I don't
you're
want
saying
them.
in post capitalism, like we just take you out the back end.
And yeah, that would be ideal. I think, whatever, like maybe personal contracts or something like that. What, I don't know, like it's like, who cares? Just get rid of them. Deprofessionalize stuff. Tell them to get their heads out of their asses a little bit.
I'm gonna quote this to my lawyer friend who's like
no,
the best
I
man
mean
I
it's
ever
like a
had.
default lawyer position to be like lawyers are terrible. I would never trust a lawyer who's like, I love lawyers, Don't trust that guy.
Yeah, I wake up every morning fucking lawyers.
Like, yo, these people are sick.
Though some people want to date lawyers, like really, really want to date.
Yeah,
they find
that's a
it
big
sexy.
red flag. That's a red flag.
I find it sexy. Come on, that fucking big red mustache of yours, fucking pointing fingers.
That has nothing to do with my. That has nothing to do with
mean,
lawyering. It's just,
You could very easily be a fireman instead.
Yeah, I might move into that.
Hell yeah.
So, dear listeners, if you went through this whole episode, which I am sure you have, and you've been convinced on like 98, 99, 100% of all of the points that Alex, me, and JT outlined here, obviously mostly Alex, there's still something that's just fucking ringing in your head, I'm guessing, and it's always ringing in everyone's head when we're talking about prisons in particular, and that's like, what about the bad guys, what about really bad crime, like murder, etc., etc.? What the fuck do we do there?
Okay, so this is like the big question, right? And I think one of the reasons it's tough to answer is just like in my experience, not here obviously, but in my experience, like half the time someone will ask you this, it's because they just want to be like, look, we got him. This guy's an idiot,
Yeah.
And I think it kind of plays into that like naive thing of like, oh, these people, they don't know how the real world works. And it's like, man, I see the real world, unfortunately, very up close every day. But I do think it's a fair question. And I tried to kind of say this before. The most important thing that people need to understand is that abolition is a horizon, right? Abolitionists are principled people. They're interested in harm mitigation. That's what my job is more than anything else. I'm, in some ways, public defenders, you can sometimes feel like a cog in the machine because I'm just like part of this machinery. I might help somebody sometimes. But like, it's easy to feel like, well, I'm just part of this. But it's about harm mitigation. Like for public defenders, it's about like harm mitigation. And I think abolition is interested in that harm mitigation, but ultimately arriving at like a future that's good for all of us. And it's not utopian, because most of the people who are really talking about this stuff are doing work against these systems, or they're trying to support their communities to get towards this ultimate goal, right, of eradicating the prison industrial complex, of abolishing the police and these institutions which are deeply, deeply tied to capitalism. So we're aware of how bad it is and how fucked up it is, and that it's a dogfight. It's David versus Goliath. But so, and I know someone's listening to this and they're like, all right, buddy, but what the fuck are we going to do with these murderers? Like, that's all nice, but what are we going to do? And it's like, no, we'll get there. Hold on. Institutions like slavery and segregation, a long time ago, people thought that those were not changeable. They were just like too integrated into our lives, and it was impossible to imagine an alternate future.
Ideology. You sounded
Yeah.
like Zizek for a second. Yes, please.
People, yes. And people who did were called fanatics. The people who were like, let's do something different. So as far as like bad crime, whatever you want to call it, a big bad crime, the worst thing you could think of, unfollowing me on social media, for example, and like, murder, whatever it is. What are we doing about that stuff now? You know what I mean? How many crimes do you think cops are solving versus get committed? Because I can tell you that it's less than 10% of the major crimes. Okay, I have a study, I can send it to you. It's on police clearance rates, which also are already fucked up because they're self-reporting, right? So it's like, it's asking an arsonist who's a firefighter what his funding should be, and I've been around long enough to know that, some people aren't convinced by that. They're not convinced by cops don't stop these things and rarely respond to what people would consider like a really bad crime. Some people aren't satisfied by that. So, okay, that's fine. I think it comes down to a question of weighing these things, which is, we've talked about this today. We know what this system does. We know that a person every month is dying on Rikers Island. being detained pre-trial before conviction of a crime. We know cops are killing 1,000 people a year that we know of. We know people are being prosecuted and imprisoned almost entirely along lines of race and class. And that losing a loved one to prison can destabilize and destroy families and communities. And it does it every single day. And if we know that all of that is happening, are we actually interested in stopping that and creating a system that prevents that and also uses the money for prisons and police, which is somewhere in the ballpark of like $200 billion a year, to actually fund communities and prevent the root causes that lead to the vast majority of crime and criminality? And not to be annoying, but to be annoying, because I am very annoying. What's a crime? What is a crime? You know, like Alec Karakatsanis, he's got a really good Twitter that I recommend people follow. He does like police propaganda breakdowns that are pretty cool. He's written about this, he wrote about this in his book. A lot of people talk about this, which is like, why is it a crime to throw dice in an alley but not a casino? Or, you know, drug possession is a crime for my client, but like it's fine for Chad to do, you know, blow outside of the nightclub. And the state can make shoplifting a crime, but they're not going to make wage theft a crime. And wage theft is conservatively $50 billion a year. And by some estimates, it's almost double that. So that's multiple times the value of all forms of property crime combined. We're not asking enough of our leaders or the people in power. We're just kind of accepting it as fact that this is how the way the world works. And I think that abolition requires us to be a little bit more imaginative and also to like fight for a future that like we want to live in, or maybe if we're crazy enough, like we want our children to live in. And so I think that's really what it's about. It's not any individual thing. It's about talking about all of us collectively and how we're going to reach that future. So yeah, it's really, really bad. But a lot of crime is interpersonal. And there are a lot of other people who have come up with really interesting and cool systems, like indigenous people, the Navajo peace building process, that integrate, you know, community restorative justice practices, like bringing together a community to deal with harm and actually getting to a root cause of harm. And instead of having a system where you are focused around punishment, you're focused around the obligation that a person owes by harming someone else, because no one gains anything by someone languishing in a cell, basically. And so I think it requires you to be a little bit more expansive in your outlook. And unfortunately, that doesn't lend itself to a soundbite. You know, like that's just the reality. But I really do believe that, like, I think we can get there. I don't know. I mean, I've come a long way, and like I fuck with it. So I don't know. And
I don't think we have a choice. I think we have to. Yeah.
I think it's a slow it's a slow process. It's a process. And it's kind of that, what is the Lenin thing? Decades,
weeks, decades can happen.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I believe that truly, but I think it's going to take people working on these things and paying attention to them and understanding. And that's that's a big part of this. Because the way people talk about it, you know, when someone says something disparaging about abolitionists, they're like, these people want to cut loose, you know, they're just imagining this make-believe world that no one ever said would be the case. No one's like,
all the pedophiles running around.
Yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to just send all these people to your neighborhood to come kill you, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And it's like, no, we're talking about let's give resources to communities. Let's figure out how we can give people access to the things they need, secure housing, blah, blah, blah. It's something that's a process. Like, yeah, I do believe that we need to shut these places down. We need to shut down Rikers. We need to have places where people can go and live and have stability. They're still human beings at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality. No one is defined by a single fucked up thing or even a couple fucked up things that they did. That's just not how it works. That's how life works if you're a fucking baby.
Alex, thank you for making this episode even more incredible than what I could have expected in the beginning. Could you please tell all of our dear listeners where they can find you, the stuff that you're up to, and any external causes that you would like to support? Dear listeners, all of this will be in the description below the audio or video, depending on what platform you're listening on. Alex?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It was really cool. If you want to, you can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and all the socials. It's loloverruled, which is, it's an old one. I made it a long time ago, but now I can't change it because it's been too long.
Awesome.
Wow,
it's bad.
It's awesome.
It's so cheesy. And
whenever Alex writes lol, I just write overruled.
Yes, it's
below.
true.
I can't help it.
And we actually started a Discord where we're doing a monthly reading group. Mostly has been free reading stuff, but our first one is actually coming up this week. I think this might come out after that, but we have a monthly reading group, which maybe people might be interested in. It doesn't cost any money if you like books. I don't know. And on September 30th, I don't know when you're hearing this, but on September 30th, I'm doing a 24-hour stream on Twitch to benefit the people of Pakistan who are going through a horrible situation right now. We're going to have some interesting guests, hopefully. I don't know. It's coming together. So if you want to check that out, that could be cool. And we're also going to have weird challenges. I'm probably going to have to eat a hot chip and do other stuff that I don't really want to do.
Hell yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to Alex for coming on. It's a great episode. This has been the Deprogram. I'm JT.
I'm Ugopnik.
Fuck 12.